Hi O-level students. In this video, we're going to talk about Richard Cory by Edwin Arlington Robinson. The writer was born in 1869 in the USA and he died in 1935. This poem is based on the economic depression that happened in 1893 in the USA. The poem was actually published in 1897 in a collection of poems called Children of the Night. The basis for the poem, or the inspiration he got from that incident, that economic depression that happened in 1893, that is important because they talk about, for example, cursing the bread. That bread has a relevance to that incident. Other than that, it is not just limited to that period. The theme or themes discussed in the poem are relevant to today's society as well. We can understand that when we have a look at the poem. Okay, that's about the background of the writer. Now we get to the poem itself. I will read the poem for you and then I will explain it line by line. And this is a very short poem, right? Compared to the last video we did on Big Match 1983, this is way too small, right? And way too easier to handle because of that reason. We have only 4 stanzas. One stanza has only 4 lines. That means it's very easy for us to complete within a short period of time. I mean the video time here. Okay, I will let's say talk about just a few things to make it clearer and easier for you to understand before reading the poem for you. One thing is that the poem is presented through the voice of a person living in the downtown area. And the other thing is, this poem is a narrative poem, right? That narration is like a storytelling, and it is the story of Richard Cory given to us through the voice of a person living on the pavement, probably one who got affected by that economic depression in the USA at the time. And he represents the collective voice of all the townspeople, right? That means downtown people. If it is important for you to know what a downtown area is, normally in the USA, there are, if you take a city, there are uptown area and downtown area, right? They are basically because of, let's say, the amount of commercial activities and how wealthy the neighborhood is. Normally, uptown area is wealthy and residential. Downtown area is normally for commercial activities, businesses are going on there, all the hustle and bustle could be seen there. If I give you a simple example from our country, our major city, the commercial city Colombo, if you are familiar with the area of Colombo city, I could say Colombo 7 and somewhat close to Colombo 3 could be more residential, and a bit of that look of uptown, let's say, environment. And if you take Peta, then maybe Colombo 10 like Maradan and Panchikawat area, and then Colombo 8 like Borella. And if you take other close suburbs to that, that could be like downtown, right? You can see that a lot of like the houses are packed together, and most of them are like business spaces. A lot of business commercial activities are going on. Not that ideal for a like calm and quiet residential kind of building. So that is also something you have to understand. This is like one of the things that is connected with the background to the poem to understand it better. Right, let's get to the poem now. Whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. He was a gentleman from sole to crown, clean-favored and imperially slim. Okay, look at these 4 lines, right? In the first stanza, we see a description of Richard Cory in the second half. In the first 2 lines, whenever Richard Cory went downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. Right, we people on the pavement looked at him means the narrator of the poem is one of the people from the downtown area. He is living on the pavement. He is representing that people in the downtown area. So downtown area, if people are living in downtown area, normally the suggestion is that they are not that rich, they are not that wealthy. So we people looked at him. One important thing in the poem is that in the first 3 stanzas actually, the writer shows us what kind of an admiration people had, these downtown people had towards Richard Cory, right? Whenever he came downtown, we people on the pavement looked at him. Why should you look at a person every time he comes there? Because you have a close relationship with him? That is not the case here. This person is looking at Richard Cory from a distance. He is not a close companion of Richard Cory or a friend of Richard Cory. He has no friends here. Whenever he comes here, the people on the pavement look at him. So we people looked at him. He was a gentleman from soul to crown. He was the epitome of a gentleman, the ideal example for a gentleman. From soul to crown means that, right? Like head to toe. Every inch, he was a gentleman. He was a perfect example for a gentleman. That's what the writer is trying to say. That means that is what these townspeople think about Richard Cory. And then the writer gives us the appearance of Richard Cory, the physical appearance he had. He is a clean-favored man. And he is imperially slim. So these words are like these words may look a bit strange to today's discussion of people. We don't say like clean-favored now, but clean-favored means clean-cut. That means the features of Richard Cory, they are really well defined, like nose, eyes, facial features, body. That is well defined. I hope you can understand, students. If the features are well defined, they are like perfect. They look perfect. That's the kind of physical look Richard Cory had. He was clean-favored, clean-cut, well-defined body features. He's handsome and imperially slim. He is not like fat. He is not thin. He is slim. Slim has a positive meaning always, right? Slim, imperially slim, like a king, like let's say like a royalty. He is like, imperial means like empire, imperial, right? Like empire is like emperor. If you take the word emperor is a king of kings, and his look was like that of a king of kings, regal, royal look. That was the kind of physical appearance he had. Okay, that's the description of the first stanza. I think you can easily understand. And then the second stanza, we can talk about the techniques as well. Okay, I will read that for you again. And he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked. But still he fluttered pulses when he said, "Good morning," and he glittered when he walked. Okay, let's have a look at the lines again separately. This anaphora is like the beginning of 2 lines, consecutive lines, starting with the same phrase. Here, and he was always. Those are the 2 parts, right? The repeated part. And he was always quietly arrayed. And he was always human when he talked. That is the kind of character Richard Cory was. And that is the kind of, let's say, the taste he had when it comes to clothing, wearing clothes. He was not showy, he was not ostentatious, he was not flashy in his clothes. He wore very tasteful clothes. That means he had a good taste, refined taste. And he was always human when he talked. When he talked with the downtown people here, he was always human. He was always, let us say, kind-hearted and polite and humble. That's the kind of this shows the townspeople's attitude towards Richard Cory. they admire everything about Richard Cory. His looks, his manners, his behavior, everything about him is admired by the townspeople here. Having a perfect life, his wealth, being richer than a king, and that comes in the next stanza. Here, he was always quietly arrayed, and he was always human when he talked to the people. That means the way they feel. I mean, talking to people kindly is not something special. It should be a human thing. But they see this speciality because this person comes from upper class. All the people on the pavement are from the working class. They are having a hard time. Richard Cory, he is having the best life they could imagine. That's why they admire him this much. And finally that leads to envying his position, right? That will come in the next stanza. Here you see, if you take this line, but still he fluttered pulses when he said good morning. When he said good morning to these people on the pavement, they were so excited about that. This rich man having that perfect life coming to this downtown area, and like a celebrity, like a king coming down to the public to greet them. This is like that. That's how these townspeople see Richard Cory. This ideal life. They are idealizing Richard Cory and idolizing Richard Cory at the same time. And even if he says that good morning, it's a very casual thing for one human being to greet another human being saying good morning. But even that is something exciting to the people on the pavement. That's how Richard Cory was treated, like a celebrity. They are almost like starstruck by the presence of Richard Cory. That's something, right? That is something the writer is showing us through these lines here. And he glittered when he walked. He glitters, he shines among the townspeople, among these people in the downtown area. He glitters, he's shining. His looks, he is highlighted. He is let's say, standing out in the crowd. That's what the writer is saying when he says he glittered when he walked. That is the second stanza, right? I hope you understood. And now we move on to the third stanza of the poem. And this is a culmination of the description of Richard Cory. And he was rich. Yes, richer than a king. Imagine the language, right? This narrative poem, the narrative language. And he was rich. Yes, richer than a king. This is an exaggeration, obvious exaggeration. This man from the pavement, he says, he was rich, yes, richer than a king. Richer than a king shows us how rich he was seen to be by the people in the downtown area. They think that this man is richer than a king. He's so rich, so wealthy. And that is their perception. We don't know for sure whether that's the truth or not. But Richard Cory, at the time, we don't know whether he is having some kind of difficulties, because finally he commits suicide. But still we do not know the reason. The writer does not give us any particular reason for that incident either. So we can, in your answers, you can give your logical reasoning behind your ideas. Remember that if you give them strongly, you always get marks, right? It's not like mathematics here. We don't get 1 + 1 2 kind of answers, like definite answers for these questions. You can build up your logic and support that with your critical thinking, and then get more marks, right? I mean, that's simply what critical thinking is all about. Here, he was richer than a king according to this man, and he says, Richard Cory was admirably schooled in every grace. By looking at his behavior, the way he behaves when he comes to this downtown area, this man thinks Richard Cory is admirably schooled in every grace. He is educated, he is well-mannered, he is well-bred, he is very, very cultured, and it shows how sophisticated his behavior is. how sophisticated Richard Cory is. That is given through these two lines, basically the second line. And then when we come to the last two lines of this stanza, third stanza, the second half of this, this man is telling us what they think about Richard Cory finally, because all these things Richard Cory had, he has created an impression among these townspeople, strong impression. That impression has gathered a lot of almost let's say fans for Richard Cory. They are almost like fans when they see this perfect figure appearing among them. They are very excited even to be greeted by him. Now, in fine, the writer says, in fine, we thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. This is the final step of admiration. Up to this point, the townspeople were admiring Richard Cory, his appearance, his qualities, his wealth, and everything was admired about Richard Cory. Within the second half of this stanza, we see now it has turned to envy. In fine means in short. We thought that he was everything to make us wish that we were in his place. This is something, this is like when it comes to false social values, right? A question may come based on this part, students, right? That's important for you to highlight. That question could be like false social values, right? Society valuing his wealth over everything else and assuming because of that wealth he has to be happy and he is the happiest man in the world according to this description we hear through the mouth of this person from the pavement. But we can see that is not the case when we get to the end of the poem. Okay, we are just 4 lines away from getting to the end of the poem. In the last stanza, now we come to the last stanza, that's the 4th stanza. There, the first 2 lines, right? That is also again important to highlight, students. This poem has 4 stanzas, that means 4 by 4, that is 16 lines, right? Those 16 lines describe basically about Richard Cory, except these 2 lines. These 2 lines directly tell us what the townspeople undergoing at the time, right? The kind of life they have. They say, look at this. So on we worked and waited for the light and went without the meat and cursed the bread. This narrative style is always highlighted. Writer is using a lot of ands here, right? The writer has used these 2 lines very effectively to give us the best possible picture he could give using the least number of words you can see, right? So on we worked and waited for the light. That's what we did. We had to work hard and we waited for the light. I will come to that again. And went without the meat and cursed the bread. Going without meat. Meat is basically a delicacy, luxury compared to just bread, right? Just bread. Cursing the bread. They cursed the bread means they hated the bread. This bread has a particular relevance, right? During that depression, economic depression in the USA in 1893, some people, a lot of people on the pavement or people who went homeless or having a very hard time, they could not afford fresh bread. They had to be satisfied with a day-old bread, right? That's the kind of bread they had to eat, a lot of people, because that was cheaper than the fresh bread. So the other thing, bread basically means the food of the poor people, and it symbolizes poverty, right? If you subsist only on bread, that means you are poor, and that shows poverty. Cursing the bread means hating the poverty they were undergoing at the time because of the economic depression, and they were waiting for the light. In the very first stanza, in the very first line of the 4th stanza, So on we worked and waited for the light. That is very important, students, to highlight in your answers, because we have only 2 lines, right, about these people. So waited for the light. The light symbolizes hope, and metaphorically it tells us about a better future, a good period of time. So they waited for the light means they were waiting for this economic depression to end and for their lives to get better. That's what they did. But Richard Cory had everything according to them. So that is the contrast here. The writer is using this as a technique. We will come to the techniques later. And the light symbolizes hope. That's what made them keep going with all the struggles they had, basically financial, economic, those hardships. But they had hope. Hope keeps people going in their lives. Like Richard Cory maybe did not have that hope, because these people's hope is connected with like better living condition. Richard Cory already has that. Maybe we can come to that later again when we compare the two like let's say living conditions of the 2 classes, like the upper class, Richard Cory's class, and then the working class, these townspeople's class, social class. And nevertheless, this point is very valid, students. Okay, these people's lives, they kept going because of the hope they had in the back of their minds for this situation to get better in the future. And they cursed the bread. Went without the meat means the sacrifice they made, right? They had to go without the meat. They could not, like let's say, afford to have them. They could not indulge in luxuries, delicacies, meat. They had to go without the meat. They cursed the bread nevertheless. That means they wanted to have that better life as soon as possible. They hated that poverty. So bread symbolizes poverty. So symbolism is also one technique the writer has used. Not that many examples. These are the examples, light and bread. Okay, those are the 2 lines, first 2 lines of the 4th stanza. That's the kind of life they were having. While they were living that life, what happens to Richard Cory? Look at the last 2 lines of the stanza and the whole poem. And Richard Cory, one calm summer night, went home and put a bullet through his head. That man who had the perfect life according to these townspeople, one calm summer night. That is also contrasting to this incident of Richard Cory killing himself, right? He kills himself not in like let's say hectic, noisy, troublesome in a kind of situation in the background. One calm summer night. That was the kind of night. One calm summer night, he killed himself. He went home and shot himself in the head. This comes as a shock. Writer telling us the story of Richard Cory through the mouth of this person from the pavement, and then finally telling us that he went home one calm summer night and killed himself. We don't know why. So students, you have to guess. Why did Richard Cory kill himself? Think about it. Could that be loneliness he had because he could not have a close relationship with the townspeople because of the gap, or let's say they always wanted to admire Richard Cory. It's like a celebrity today, right? If you see a celebrity, you are hysterical. You are too excited to have like normal relationship with that person. To develop that, you need to have like let's say equal level kind of start. These townspeople did not have that. They always admired him, how wealthy, how rich, and how wonderful this person, how like almost like something out of this world. That is the kind of picture, that's the kind of image, that's the kind of impression they had about Richard Cory. That could have been a barrier for Richard Cory to have a close relationship with these townspeople, even if he wanted to. That's something you can highlight, right, in your logical, critical answers. If that were the case, that could have been the case, right, very likely. You can say that Richard Cory could have been lonely without having a close relationship to share his feelings. I mean, that's why it is important. This writer, Edwin Arlington Robinson, his poems are like his works of art basically talks about the human condition, pathos, or humans being like failures because of different reasons in the human society. Here also you can see, right? We all are humans. Richard Cory is a human being. Those people on the pavement, they are also human beings, same human race, the members of that same human race. The differences they have, the false social values again. These people think that riches bring happiness. Wealthy people who have a high social status should be happy, a lot happier than themselves. But that idea is challenged by this poem, right, by the writer. That perfect figure, that perfect man goes home and kills himself at an unexpected moment. Those people who were having all sorts of struggles to make both ends meet, who were just living hand to mouth, they continue, they survive the poem, but Richard Cory cannot even survive the poem. I mean, like, Richard Cory cannot survive 16 lines. When it comes to 16th line, he's gone, he's dead. But those poor people, townspeople, they are living at the end of the poem, right? I mean, it's like a funny thing in that sense. Like, the social value is like looked at ironically. That is, I mean, the major technique of the poem is also irony when it comes to the two major themes of the poem, right? One is like appearances are deceptive. That is one of the major themes that could a lot of questions be based. Mostly, if there are going to be a question based on the poem, that is very likely to be one. Appearances are deceptive, or you can say appearance versus reality. That's one thing. There, the appearance, the outside, the outward impression the people had got about Richard Cory was that he was having a perfect life. That could be that was utterly wrong, and finally it leaves us in shock when we hear that Richard Cory got home and put a bullet through his head. That's ironical. Up to third stanza, the writer builds up Richard Cory's character, or the image of Richard Cory, to be a perfect one and to be richer than a king. And then the writer talks about the townspeople's life, and then in the last two lines he tells us that he committed suicide. That's ironical. We never expected that to happen. So irony is basically expectation versus reality, right? You understand that here. We never expect Richard Cory to kill himself, but that's exactly what he does. So it's ironical. The writer is using irony to bring out that theme. That is something you have to include in your answers, right? The other theme where irony comes very effectively is the relationship between wealth and social status and happiness. Normally we tend to think that if you are wealthy, you are happy. If you have both wealth and social status, you must be really happy. You must be living a happy life. That conception is questioned here. That is challenged. The writer, according to this story of Richard Cory, it is wrong. Richard Cory had wealth and social status, social recognition, a lot of admiration coming from these townspeople, but still, at an unexpected moment, he kills himself. So that is there something, I mean, like the irony again can be used as a highly effective technique. So you have to attribute that to writer's merit here. The writer is using irony very effectively to bring out that theme as well, right? That wealth and happiness. Here, according to the writer, there is a disconnect between the two, right? They are not connected. One could be very, very wealthy and still he may not be happy. Okay, now we come to another theme of the poem. That is the social differences, right? Or social, let's say, inequality here, when it comes to, especially when it comes to the living condition of the people. Within the first three stanzas, the writer talks about how rich, how, let's say, how perfect Richard Cory's life was. Everything about him was praised and admired, and he was schooled in every grace, well educated, well cultured, well bred, well mannered, and so sophisticated, and he was richer than a king. But look at the other group, the downtown people. I mean, they were having a very hard time. They were like living hand to mouth. They had to go without the meat. They had to curse the bread. They had to depend on, like, let's say, meager, like, skimpy meals. But Richard Cory, the upper class, the class difference, right? This social inequality is connected with the class difference, social classes. Richard Cory comes from an upper class family. He represents the upper class. And this person who is telling us a story in the poem, he represents the townspeople, the poor people of the town. So that means, the gap between them is huge. One having everything, the other having almost nothing, having a very difficult life in front of them, right? A question could be based on that as well, that theme, right? The difference, social inequality, the difference, gap between the haves and the have-nots. One group having a lot of money, a lot of wealth, the others not having even enough money even to survive. So they are struggling to survive. They are sacrificing. They are going without the meat. I mean, like sacrifices of today for a better future, with the hopes of better future. That's what kept them going, right? That is one theme. Another theme could be the internal struggle versus external struggle, or inner struggle. Richard Cory's struggle was an inner struggle, and the townspeople's struggle was not an inner struggle. It was external. They were having financial problems. They were having economic problems. They were like trying to survive, meet the basic needs they had in their day-to-day life just to survive, not to like indulge in luxuries. That's an external problem, right? External struggle. And that is seen by everybody. I mean, if you don't have a proper home to live, you have to live somewhere. Everybody can see that. They notice that. They may come and help. Somebody might come to you and give you a small help. And that could ease a bit of your difficulty, probably. But if the struggle is inner struggle, like Richard Cory's struggle, we don't know what is going on there, right? Just like these townspeople, they had no clue of what was exactly going on in Richard Cory's life, like inside his life. These people were watching him at a distance or from a distance and just like imagining the rest. Having perfect looks and having a lot of wealth and being well educated, being very humble, being very polite. These things gave them that impression, false impression, that this man could be happy. We can now understand when we come to the end of the poem that was not the case. He was not happy. Probably he was lonely. And we can like go deeper into the problem, because this poem was based on that economic depression in the USA. Normally, when economic depression happens, even very wealthy people could go bankrupt, right? Because of in that situation that can happen. I mean, you can consider that as well. You can include them in your answers to support your answers if something like that is going to be in the question, right? That is something you can pay attention to. I mean, I'm telling you these things because This is basically to have a critical mentality about whatever you read. It could be a poem, it could be anything. Here, to understand the messages the writer is trying to bring out, you have to pay attention to the particular setting. Here, the poem was written in that setting, so we have to consider some of the important facts that could have contributed to the build-up of the whole story by the writer, like this, and writer leaving us to guess the reasons why Richard Cory killed himself. The writer leaving us to have all sorts of assumptions about the causes of his death. But you can see something similar when we compare this to the last poem we did, Big Match 1983, because these two poems come under society, right? If society, human society is full of differences. In the last poem we did, that was, as I said, Big Match 1983, there was a difference that was ethnicity, Tamils and Sinhalese. That ethnic difference led to the death of hundreds or thousands of people. When there are differences between social groups, what happens is actually some kind of division is created, some kind of gap is created. That gap, that division could lead to some kind of, let's say, misunderstandings and wrong ideas about the other group, which again could lead to a disastrous situation. Here again we see we all are members of human society. Richard Cory is one, and all these townspeople are also members of that same human society. The differences are here basically wealth and social status, and nothing else, right? A group of people, they are struggling hard to survive. The upper class people, they are having different types of problems. And when it comes to Richard Cory's incident, finally what happens? Richard Cory was loved by these townspeople. He was a good person. If these townspeople knew that Richard Cory were to kill himself, these people would have, prevented that. These people would not let that happen. They did not want that to happen, I think. I think we can argue in that direction. But the difference, this person was very rich. He was almost like untouchable. These townspeople would never think that Richard Cory would need any help to keep going with that seemingly perfect life. What is the barrier here? The wealth. These poor people could not get closer to Richard Cory. They could not become close companions of Richard Cory or a friend of Richard Cory because of that, the difference of one being rich and one being poor. So these differences affecting human lives, right? This is also something. Like in Big Match 1983, it was destruction of one ethnicity. Here, this is one person losing his life, and this social differences contributing or letting that happen, at least you can say, right? This could have been prevented if Richard Cory had a close friend from among these people on the pavement. That didn't happen. That was because of the social difference. Another theme of the poem is false social values, right? For example, these townspeople envy Richard Cory's life. Why? Because he is rich. Because he has a high social status, high social recognition compared to these townspeople who consider them to have a struggle of a life and a wretched life, living a poor life, like being impoverished because of that incident, the economic problem, crisis in the USA. And these people think that they are almost like inferior. For them to get to that level of Richard Cory, they think that they need to have a lot of wealth. For a human being to be good, to be respected, they do not have to have a lot of wealth. That's a misconception. that is a false social value. That's why it is important to have like correct social values, true social values which have a real basis in human society. So they should be promoted. The writer is highlighting that also. That's why, I mean, we can directly question this thing. Imagine if Richard Cory were to lose all the wealth he had, and with that social status, because of those things he used. Is he a bad person? Is he not equal to other human beings? He is. So the inequality is created through wealth and social status connected with that. That is also questioned. Okay, students, these are the basic things we have to talk about the poem. And the other thing, the techniques. We have already talked about irony, the most important technique. And then imagery is another thing. Imagery, to give us a clear picture of Richard Cory, the writer has used imagery. You can see like clean favored, imperially slim, glittered when he walked. Those give us clear picture of how rich and how handsome and how elegant Richard Cory was, right? His appearance. And when it comes to his wealth, he is like said to be richer than a king. That's hyperbolic exaggeration, right? So exaggeration is also used, or otherwise you can say hyperbole, richer than a king. That's the example you can take for that. And then another technique the writer has used is contrast. Contrast is the example, the example you can give from the poem is first 3 stanzas describing Richard Cory and building up Richard Cory's story to a climax where finally he's said to be richer than a king. And then in fine, everybody wanting to be in his place. And then within the very next 2 lines, writer puts the wretched life, the hard life the townspeople were having at the time. That is contrast, right? Opposite conditions being put close to each other. Those 2 things, like the life of the upper class and the life of the poor working class. The contrast is used as a technique there. You can highlight that also in your answers. And then another technique is like using symbolism, as I said earlier, waiting for the light, that is one thing, and then cursing the bread. Bread symbolizes poverty, and the light symbolizes hope and a better life. So you can talk about that. And light is like almost like let's say metaphorically talking about hopes, right? Like the light at the end of a tunnel, right? That's hope. Light is hope, metaphorically, and as a symbol as well. So those are the techniques, students. You can highlight them in your answers. I think there wouldn't be any confusions here because the poem is very short. First 3 stanzas talking about Richard Cory, and the last stanza being dedicated to talk about the tragic end and the hard life of the people on the pavement. Very simple. Those are the things. And questions could be based on 4 major themes connected with false social values. I mean, that question could be connected, tied to those previous themes we talked about. If I remind you of them again, one is appearances are deceptive, or appearance versus reality. And then the other one is wealth and happiness, the disconnect between the two. Or wealth and social status guarantees happiness, or make sure happiness is there. That is not the case. That is like refuted, or let's say debunked. And then another thing was the inequality in society, or social inequality between the rich and the poor. But the writer has used only 2 lines to talk about the poor, but he is like very effectively talking about them in those 2 lines. Working hard and waiting for the light, and going without the meat, and cursing the bread. That's the hard life that the poor people, the social inequality between the 2 classes, social classes as upper class and the working class. And the last theme I talked about was inner struggle versus external struggle, or internal struggle versus external struggle. Townspeople having very obvious struggle anybody could see, and Richard Cory having inside struggle going on, nobody knew about that, and probably he never shared that with anybody. He was lonely, and social difference contributing to that loneliness as well, because of that barrier that was created by the wealth, and him being very rich and the townspeople being very poor. This is the sum up of everything, students, right? I think you have a very clear picture of the poem now, what the writer is trying to say through the poem, and I hope you would be able to write any question based on this poem. I think you know how to organize an answer, like proving your point, and I think this is pretty much it when it comes to this poem. And the other thing, I can have a quick look at a question I have here. Richard Cory refutes the idea that riches brings happiness. Critically examine this statement. That is something we have already done actually. Riches brings happiness. Richard Cory was very wealthy, but he was not happy inside. He had some, let's say, secret kind of struggle going on inside him that led to his death actually. So you can take that point, and through the poem you can highlight how rich he was, and finally that not being the case, that not leading to his happiness, finally him killing himself, and the people who did not have the riches at least continuing to live, right, with the hopes they had. I think that is basically the thing you have to highlight in your answer. And always you have to like quote from the poem. That is always let's say supportive to get more marks, right? That is something you have to bear in mind. So that is it for the day, students, and I hope to see you in the next video. Do not forget to subscribe to my channel, and like this video and share this video with your friends. And then good luck. See you in the next video.